Good evening. I'm Charles Bell of the Continuing Education Workshops. While we have always strived to bring interesting and valuable programs, tonight's presentation is also good for 2 hours of HSW credits. Join our committee as we've been working together with interesting topics and excellent speakers. Under the leadership of Chairman Chris Ching, we meet on 4th Fridays, right here at 7:30 on 4th Fridays. Talk to me or Helen or Bill, and we would be pleased to include you in our workshops committee. This evening, please fill out the program evaluation form at the end of the program. Don't do it before the program. If you are online, please respond at the program conclusion. And if you are virtual this evening, please use Zoom's question and answer or the chat feature. This evening, we travel to Paris and South Bend with Rebuilding Notre Dame. Or should I say Notre Dame or Notre Dame? Bill, when we put this program together, it seemed cute and it reads pretty well on script, but when you have to actually introduce it verbally, it sounds really silly, doesn't it? Next month, we will travel into film, imagination, and Disney World in Manifesting the Imagination. Zach Ridley from Walt Disney Imagineering will take us into an exciting alternative design reality. And we always skip December because December is always packed with way too many holiday schedules, and return in January. So January's program is Dining Destinations, Food for Thoughtful Restaurant Design. You see what we did there? And that will be Tom Niemeyer, our own AIA St. Louis member, Tom Niemeyer, who will be presenting with some others. And now it's my pleasure to introduce AIA St. Louis's new executive director, Karen Taylor Liggins. So Karen, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you. I just want to say that it's a pleasure to be here tonight, especially with such a great program. I'm excited to learn more about Notre Dame. Yes. But thank you for the warm welcome, and I look forward to getting to know each and every one of you and doing more things in the time to come. So thank you.
You got off easy. Now all you have to do is remember the names of 500 members. And it's a pleasure to introduce Dan Maloney from NCARB Materials. NCARB has generously sponsored this and many other workshop series programs. I hope you had the opportunity to speak with Dan and visit NCARB's product booth. Thanks, Dan. And please, if you would like to say a few words about products or programs or anything. Thank you.
Good evening. Again, my name is Dan Maloney with NCARB Materials. NCARB, as you probably know, we've been around for 98 years. We're a distributor of drywall and acoustical products. I am the acoustical product manager for all of NCARB. We have 9 yards. And it's interesting because we are involved in efforts such as this, and you guys don't buy anything from us, and we know that. But without you, we don't exist. So really, what I want to say is thank you for allowing us to support you. The things you do make our life worthwhile. Me being an acoustical product manager, my reason for living is making things quieter, and I can only do that with the help of you. So normally our representation here would be Lori Thompson and Russ Thompson. They happen to be married and they're on vacation. They asked me to jump on in. So we appreciate everything you guys do. And with the AIA, we've been very pleased to support you over the years, and we will continue to do so. So even if you have projects that are far flung, like Notre Dame, I don't even care if it's in this country, please come to us and we will help you with that. We're not looking to say, okay, oh, by the way, it's not going to be in St. Louis, so we're not going to help you. Not an issue at all. I worked on a project yesterday with an architect, and they're doing something in New Jersey. I will never sell anything on that project, but that's okay. We're here to support AIA and your individual organizations any way we can on interior finish and exterior building envelope. So there's a lot of things we can do for you. So thank you very much and enjoy the program tonight. And hope you get something out of it and get your AIA credits. Thank you.
And now it's my pleasure to present longtime committee member Bill Burmeister and his program, Rebuilding Notre Dame.
Thank you, Charles. Well, thank you for all coming. Besides, it's kind of a hybrid program here tonight because we have you here in person as well as those who are on Zoom virtually. Those who are virtual, please note that you can post your questions online, and they will be then put forth through to the presenters, just like those who are here in person. And with that, I'm going to introduce each one of the presenters. Tonya Ohnstad is Associate Dean for Graduate Studies, School of Architecture and Planning at Catholic University of America. Tonya is a practitioner and professor with an interest in tectonics and materials. She is interested in the intersection of history, culture, and construction. Her research uses humble, repeatable components from iconic buildings to explore historical and embodied human energy. Her projects as a bridge to practice as they harness the power of project collaboration between historians, craftspeople, students, curators, and academics. And she has a pretty exciting presentation here for you tonight. Stephen Semes is a professor at and director of the Michael Christopher Duda Center for Preservation, Resilience, and Sustainability at the University of Notre Dame School of Architecture. He was academic director of the Notre Dame Rome Studies program and currently splits his teaching duties between Rome and the main campus in South Bend near Chicago. With degrees from the University of Virginia, Columbia University, he is the author of Future of the Past, Conservation Ethics for Architecture, Urbanism, and Historic Preservation. With that, I introduce and invite the speakers.
Since I have a prepared text, it's a little hard for me to hold the microphone and read at the same time, but I'm going to try putting the microphone down. And if the people in the back row, would you let me know if you can hear me? Real good. Okay. Thank you very much. It's delightful to be here with you tonight. This is my first visit to St. Louis. I waited much too long to come, and I'm very happy to be here. Just to kind of avoid any confusion about the subject that Tonya and I are going to be talking about tonight, let's have a little language lesson. And I'm not a French speaker, so forgive me if you are, and my pronunciation isn't quite right. But Notre Dame is in Paris, Notre Dame is in Indiana. So when I say one or the other, you'll know which one I'm talking about, I hope. Unless I get confused, which is also very much possible. So thank you. Is it working?
It is working. I just want to make sure to get
Oh,
this.
and to advance the slides, just use this
Or we have
or
this.
that. Okay, that will work.
There we go.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Patrick. Let's see. I don't think they're advancing, Patrick, so I'm pressing the wrong button here. Okay. All right. On April 15th, 2019, the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris, as everyone knows, was severely damaged by a devastating fire that destroyed its roof, attic, and splendid 180-foot tall spire. It was the most recent of a series of terrible fires that have struck important historical monuments in recent decades, including the Houses of Parliament, Windsor Castle, the Redutensaal in the Imperial Library of Vienna, the La Fenice Opera House in Venice, and the Glasgow School of Art, which burned twice. Those who work in the field of restoration or rehabilitation of historic structures know that a building is at its most vulnerable precisely when there is construction work going on inside. To the danger of fire, we can add earthquake, flood, subsidence, structural failure, war, not to mention intentional demolition, adding those to the list of hazards faced by historic buildings. In many of these cases, the question of how or if the building should be repaired, restored, or reconstructed becomes difficult to answer quickly or simply. In the case of Notre Dame, the damage at first appeared catastrophic, including the complete destruction of the medieval timber framing supporting the roof, a structure so dense it was called La Forêt, the forest. Its charred remains and those of the burned flesh or spire rained down into the nave of the cathedral through the partially collapsed vaults over the crossing. In view of the massive semi-melted tangle of metal scaffolding that had only been erected shortly before to begin a restoration program, the molten and pulverized lead from the former roofing, and the general damage due to smoke and water, it seemed that little of the structure was salvageable. Luckily, as investigators learned in the following months, hope for a restoration grew. Fears of imminent collapse of the surviving masonry were replaced by cautious optimism that most of the statical organism of this most complex of stone structures was stable and could resume its service of enclosure and support. When Notre Dame burned, many people, including architects and conservation figures, lamented the loss, but their grief was made worse by the conviction that the original structure could not be restored, that the size, quality, and quantity of oak timbers required was unobtainable, that the craftsmen with the knowledge of how to fashion them into elaborate roof trusses no longer existed. Reconstruction was impossible, they declared. Instead, they said the cathedral should be refashioned according to a bold contemporary design, with various proposals for a greenhouse glass roof, trees planted above the masonry vaults, and a new spire of glass or metal, pools of water, and the like. I confess I was puzzled when the Norman Foster proposal on the left suggested that the glass roof would admit light into the nave below. Was he suggesting that all the masonry vaulting be removed to expose the interior to Parisian sunshine? How would it get through there? And how would people get to and from the new public spaces at roof level? They would need perhaps exterior elevators not shown in the renderings. The more one thought about it, the more inadequate these responses seemed to be. These proposals were often accompanied by a cultural argument in favor of a bold intervention that would, quote, reinvent, unquote, the cathedral, as if it were merely evidence of a bygone culture, as historic monuments were described in the CIAM Athens Charter drafted by Le Corbusier in 1933. Aside from the general inappropriateness and even technical impossibility of some of these proposals, not to mention their seeming indifference to the fact that the cathedral was still a place of worship, they assumed that only such a reinvention would qualify as a new layer in the history of the monument representing our own culture. This stylistic debate tended to overshadow the technical and more broadly cultural issues that properly lie at the heart of any program of conservation, heritage conservation. Modernists and traditionalists squared off, each defending not only a view of the cathedral, but an attitude toward culture and history in general. But there were also other voices, such as those of Ronaldo Hernandez, Jacques Levet Jr., and René Salas, three former students at the University of Notre Dame, who proposed precisely what the contemporary architects claimed was impossible: reconstructing the timber roof of the cathedral, rebuilding its spire, and restoring the rest of the structure, constructing a temporary cathedral to house the religious activities while the work was going on, and at the same time, using the project as an opportunity to establish an expanded training program for craftsmen in timber, masonry, metalwork, glass, and other crafts and trades in need of recuperation. These young designers maintained that the knowledge and skills needed to restore the cathedral existed and could be transmitted to others, and by this transmission could ensure the survival of both the physical artifact and the traditional crafts and trades that made our historic monuments possible and continue to maintain them today. While that proposal remained on paper, another group, Professor Tonya Ohnstad's students at Catholic University of America, which she will talk about in a few minutes, went a step further, proving with their own hands that not only is the material needed to reconstruct the timber roof structure of the cathedral available, but the components of the old foyer could be remade even by a team of architecture students under the guidance of trained and experienced timber framers. They proved that mainstream architects and conservation experts were wrong. Reconstruction of the timber roof of the cathedral was not only possible, it was within reach. Now, the French government is pursuing this alternative under the guidance of architects Philippe Villeneuve, Rémy Froment, and their team. These two architects toured the United States at the end of September, and they spoke at both of our universities on successive nights. It was a tough schedule. Inspiring their audiences with their determination to restore the cathedral as it was, bolstered by the knowledge that they bring to the task. I believe this is one of the most hopeful things happening in the world today, which I think we can all agree could use more things to be hopeful about. Perhaps we should not be so surprised that the means and the will are still available to restitute the cathedral as it was before the fire. For decades, international conservation pronouncements have called for the safeguarding of not only the physical artifacts of historic buildings, urban districts, and landscapes, but the knowledge, skills, and craftsmanship that made them possible, as well as their maintenance and preservation. Comprehensive conservation of what we now call intangible heritage is the necessary antidote to the contemporary tendency to assume that only technological innovation can solve our present problems. On the contrary, both are needed, and their synergy is likely to be far more productive than either approach alone. Contrary to conventional opinion, architectural craftsmanship and restoration skills have not disappeared, especially in France, where the traditional training and guild institutions established since the Middle Ages continue today in the Compagnonnage du Devoir a national training program that follows the traditional path from apprentice to journeyman to master. The craftspeople have always been there. We just need to identify and employ them and encourage them to train those who can follow them. If we do so, not only will we have the people we need, but more will join the cause when they see that such work is valued and supported. Oh, I'll just mention, yes, this is the storefront of the headquarters in Paris of the Compagnonnage du Devoir, and they maintain a program every year called the Tour de France, where the young craftsmen, the apprentices, have to journey around the country as itinerant craftsmen, doing projects for a specified period of time. It is evaluated, and if they make the grade, if they coupe le moutard, as we say, a little in-joke there, then they can rise in the ranks. So it's very much like the guild systems of old, and it's still happening. It's part of our intangible heritage. As I mentioned, this is a project that demands both tradition and technology in equal measure. We need timber framers who can reproduce the forest of the roof structure, and masons who know how to cut and place stones to form a vault or a flying buttress. At the same time, the project requires conservation specialists who know how to use digital platforms to run the calculations and control the fabrication of temporary supports and permanent inserted materials. In what some regard as a miraculous strike of good fortune, the cathedral had been the subject of a complete 3D digital model by Vassar College architectural historian, Dr. Andrew Tallon, just a few years ago. Using still photography as well as laser scanning techniques, he constructed an archive of visual documentation that allows confident restoration and reconstruction of most of the damaged portions of the building. A fitting tribute to Dr. Tallon, who sadly died shortly before the fire. I can't help thinking, well, maybe it's not so sad that he died before the fire, but at any rate, it's a tribute to the work that he did. So this combination of high technology and medieval craftsmanship is what I find the most interesting about the project, and Tonya will talk about this further. This whole process perfectly illustrates a combination of medieval and modern, something that Eugène Emmanuel Viollet-le-Duc understood, because his work at the cathedral in the mid-19th century was also a hybrid. His spire, designed to harmonize with and complete the medieval cathedral, was a marvel of 19th century art and engineering. His timbers were not hand-hewn, but machine cut and finished, taking full advantage of the technology of his day. In the present restoration of the cathedral, the architects are calling for the use of the same techniques that were used in the original construction of each part of the building. So, for example, the handmade timber trusses are for the medieval parts, and the machine-tooled timbers will be used for the 19th century portions supporting the spire. So each part goes back to the way it was. This will put back in place a structure resembling the pre-fire conditions as closely as possible. Current technology will also assist in another way by providing a more effective fire detection and suppression system, but also in a return to medieval conditions, there will be no electricity in the attic, because electricity is the leading cause of fires in buildings. In response to pressure from contemporary architects and cultural figures to introduce new forms and materials in response to the losses, architects Villeneuve and Froment made the same argument that Gustavo Giovannoni had made in the first half of the 20th century. Giovannoni is perhaps not familiar to many of you, but he was one of the leaders of the conservation movement in the 20th century and probably the leading figure in Italy for that period. In his 1945 book, The Restoration of Monuments, he wrote, quote, "Limiting the work of reinforcement to the minimum necessary leads to utilizing, without altering, the bearing capacities that have developed in the statics of the building over time, as distinct from the original structural conception. This concerns the precarious states of equilibrium with which a structure can spontaneously defend itself, but that last for centuries due to the countering and integrating forces within the masonry structure. To disturb those states and introduce a different system of actions sometimes makes it necessary to rebuild everything, end quote. So you see what he's saying. We need to understand that masonry structures are kind of like organisms. They behave in ways that are sometimes difficult to calculate. But if we're going to work with them, we have to understand them in ways that perhaps we haven't understood them until recently, or that we have understood until recently, but maybe no longer tend to do. Giovannoni understood, perhaps better than we do today, that masonry structures are best conceived as organisms with specific kinds of behavior. After hundreds of years, the arches, vaults, and buttresses composing a masonry organism shift and rebalance and find an equilibrium that may be significantly different from the originally intended one. But it's difficult to calculate this kind of natural equilibrium, and building codes on the whole do not recognize this kind of analysis. An important subject of research is how we might modify codes to take into consideration structural behaviors in masonry systems over the long term. This is really something where our technology, I think, falls short, but it's an area, an avenue where we could, in fact, advance if we set our minds to it. At Notre Dame, each part, each stone has a role in this highly dynamic and interactive structure with its complex balances. Remove a load or add a new one, and that equilibrium is altered in ways we may not be able to predict. Should the timber structure be replaced with a metal and glass one? Should the load be increased by groves of trees or pools of water, as some proposals suggested? It would be difficult to engineer the total building without adding potentially invasive new structural members. The only way, the architects argued, that we can predict with confidence that the masonry structure of the cathedral might last another 800 years would be to put everything back the way it was, reestablishing the equilibrium the structure had achieved prior to the fire. In this way, the architects bypass the cultural and stylistic arguments and make a pragmatic appeal on the basis of engineering. It was this technical argument, not one based on style or what is the architecture of our time and all of those questions. It was this technical engineering argument that convinced President Macron and other authorities that restoration and reconstruction, not a reinvented new structure, was the appropriate approach. Also, restoration looked like the only possibility for achieving the president's goal of completing the restoration for the Olympic Games, though that still remains uncertain, and most of us are betting against it. But certainly, introducing these completely new systems would have only elongated that temporal process. Now, what can we learn from this experience so far? For me, the most important thing is to remind everyone involved that what we wish to conserve is actually two distinct but interconnected and equally important realities in need of reinforcement by specialists and the public alike, namely tangible and intangible components of cultural heritage. I think the error made by those who declared that the fire had irreversibly destroyed Notre Dame was that they concentrated their attention on the tangible heritage that was, in fact, destroyed in the fire. This was an enormous loss, of course, and all of us watched with horror as the monument burned. But there was something equally valuable that was not lost in the fire: the intangible heritage. In 2003, UNESCO, the cultural arm of the United Nations, published the Convention for the Safeguarding of Intangible Cultural Heritage, which defines that term as, quote, the practices, representations, expressions, knowledge, skills, as well as the instruments, objects, artifacts, and cultural spaces associated therewith, that communities, groups, and in some cases, individuals recognize as part of their cultural heritage. This intangible cultural heritage, transmitted from generation to generation, is constantly recreated by communities and groups in response to their environment, their interaction with nature, and their history, and provides them with a sense of identity and continuity, thus promoting respect for cultural diversity and human creativity, end quote. In architecture, intangible heritage embraces traditional building cultures, the knowledge of the craftsman to select and process materials, the manufacture of building components and their installation, integration of different structural systems, and all the other skills needed to complete a building that, like Notre Dame, might stand for centuries. So long as the memory survives, no fire, flood, or earthquake can destroy the intangible heritage embodied in the knowledge, skill, and dedication of those trained to make, maintain, and restore cathedrals and other monuments. Therefore, we must preserve tangible heritage, not only for its own sake and to safeguard its artistic and historic significance, but also because the intangible heritage needs the models and examples provided by actual historic buildings and cities to learn how to care for them. The two realities are inextricably interwoven. Without intangible heritage, we would indeed be challenged to build or restore historic buildings. Without the transmission of that knowledge to younger generations, we would find it difficult to do what the restorers are currently doing. Difficult, but not impossible. As one of my mentors, Henry Hope Reed, once said, "What human beings have done once, they can do again." Let's see, oops. It has been a foundational principle of modern architectural conservation that there are two types of significance that we wish to preserve: artistic and historic significance. Notre Dame naturally scores high on both, but today heritage sites provide two additional types of significance, which I call communal and didactic. We now recognize that historic places are not only valuable to historians or aesthetes, but also play a role in the development and identity of communities. Especially here in the United States, as our society tries to grapple with the legacies of discrimination and disregard for the heritages of minority and marginalized communities, our new attention to communal significance will only grow. We are beginning to recognize that each community that has survived for a long time has a heritage of its own, deserving of our respect and conservation. The recent turn of the National Trust for Historic Preservation toward the identification and conservation of African American heritage is a leading example of this. At Notre Dame, there are those who regard it as an important monument of architectural history. Others see it primarily as a great work of art. Still others, perhaps many more, see it as, well, their cathedral, a house of worship, a center for Catholic culture that helps to define the identity of millions of the faithful. The importance of this to the site, the importance of this site to this community should not be overlooked. Second, historic buildings can be significant for their didactic use, showing us how we can build for the long term, the very heart of sustainability, which is not only a matter of reducing energy consumption, but also learning how to build for the future. In the marvelous words of John Ruskin in his The Lamp of Memory, he wrote, quote, "The earth belongs as much to those who are to come after us as to us. And we have no right by anything that we do or neglect to do to involve them in unnecessary penalties or deprive them of benefits which it was in our power to bequeath to them. Therefore, when we build, let us think that we build forever. Let it not be for present delight nor for present use alone. Let it be such work as our descendants will thank us for," end quote. The French writer Françoise Chouet sums up the didactic role of historic preservation very briefly in her statement, quote, "We restore in order to recapture our capacity to build." Just repeat that. I love that. We restore in order to recapture our capacity to build. More recently, the papal encyclical Laudato Si of Pope Francis sets out a complete conservation ethic, embracing both the national and natural environment and the cultural and built heritage. He writes, quote, "Together with the patrimony of nature, there is also a historic, artistic, and cultural patrimony, which is likewise under threat. This patrimony is part of the shared identity of each place and a foundation upon which to build a habitable city. Culture is more than what we have inherited from the past. It is also, and above all, a living, dynamic, and participatory present reality, which cannot be excluded as we rethink the relationship between human beings and their environment," end quote. So community identity, local culture, and environmental sustainability are all inextricably interwoven. There is no better way to learn to build sustainably than to study those buildings, cities, and landscapes that have already proven to be so. We preserve and restore historic places because they may teach us what we need to know to preserve ourselves from the consequences of the unsustainable practices of the last 100 years. With the threat of climate change looming ahead, we really have no choice but to reform our building culture along more sustainable lines. Hence, the new and necessary partnership between historic preservation and the movement for sustainable new development. Returning to Notre Dame, or Notre Dame, since maybe both apply in this case, restoration will restitute the tangible heritage of the building itself in the image that we have had of it since the 19th century, when Viollet-le-Duc restored the cathedral from the damage caused by the French Revolution and added the spire as a completion of the monument. But perhaps even more significantly, the restoration will reinforce and underscore the importance of the intangible heritage that allows us to restore cathedrals, and should we ever desire to do so, build new ones. All the same, at the same time, teaching us how to build sustainably once again. Now, if you'll just permit me to make a very quick plug, I'd like to invite you to pick up some postcards and other informations out in the lobby that explains our new graduate program in historic preservation, whose curriculum is entirely centered on all of the things that we've been talking about here tonight. And also, there's a card there to get a copy of ANTA, the new journal of our school, which features the article by Professor Ohnstad and her students about the restoration at Notre Dame. Thank you all very much.
Okay. No.
You find your slide.
Yeah. That's a tough act to follow.
Get this bar out of the way again. Sorry about that.
Sorry.
Here we are.
Great. So you are all really well. You can hear me in the back. Okay. Now you're all super well informed about the background, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I got myself involved in the reconstruction with a group of students. And I will say it was, you know, the kind of what I remember as the darkest part of COVID, the winter of 21. I was approached by some people from Hans House, who are members of the Timber Framers Guild of America. So they're craftspeople, but they're also a nonprofit educational group that was assembling a group of timber framers to rebuild one of the trusses. And they asked me if I could teach a class in parallel. And I thought this would be a really incredible experience that kind of tapped into a lot of my own interests. So I'm going to start with they're also making a documentary about this. So I'm going to start with the preview for the documentary, and then I'm going to go through the kind of slower version of everything we did, and end with some of the images of the French architects who came and we had been waiting for a very long time. So I'll start with the video. I think it'll hopefully.
People in shock, repeating it's gone, there's so much gone. If the roof goes, the whole structure is in jeopardy.
Few people in the world know that in fact above the vaulting is a wooden structure that actually supports the roof.
People didn't know about it until it burned in a lot of cases because it was hidden. It was hidden under a lead roof. It was hidden up high.
It's a triangle shape, and there's many of those stacked together, and they go all the way down from the choir, across the transept, and across the nave. Took 1,300 trees. They call the roof structure La Forêt, which means the forest.
It always amazes me though, you get an acorn and it turns into this.
We always start with an object.
Sometimes the object is a very loaded object.
In this case, a single truss that was part of the roof structure above the choir.
Within that object is embedded the history, the context, so many things that the human being brings to that object at the time it was made. As makers, it's important to kind of explore how it was made, who made it, why, and what tools, and to imagine remaking it.
This is a perfect Hands House project. Hands House is a nonprofit educational organization. We focus on building large historic objects as educational projects.
My goal is to celebrate the maker that made these originally that people forgot about.
Body's sore and your hands are bleeding and you just think, what am I doing here? And then you look up and everyone else is still working.
But when you start to see how things work and come together and like your hands kind of gain this intelligence of sorts, you start to create your own reality.
The history's gone unless we do this.
It's not a job, it's a gift.
I stopped work for 2 weeks to come do this.
It's their glory of the process of hand to tool to mark to object.
Getting to Notre Dame is their next step.
It's a big shot, a big dream.
So that gives you the whole story, but I'm going to tell you the background, the rest of it. As he was talking about, during this time, there was a lot of conversation around if it should be modern or traditional. And one of the first groups to make a demonstration was the Carpenters Without Borders, the Charpentiers Sans Frontières. And so they built truss number 7. So you're going to see that in this next amount of time, this obsession over the different trusses, and they're really interesting because each truss, each of these primary trusses over the cathedral are actually pretty different, and they represent some learning over time. And like Steve was talking about, there's a difference in terms of the way they're made and the way. So Carpenters Without Borders built truss number 7, and in that, they learned a lot of things, and they when the American contingency wanted to build a truss, they suggested do truss number 6 because then you'll learn different things, right? So this one was over the choir and ours was over the nave. And so what we were kind of assigned by Remy and Carpenters Without Borders was something that was completely done by hand, a hand hewn project. We started, so the class that I taught, there's only so much you can do in the summer. And one of the things I really wanted to do was scaffold the students. And I think this may resonate with some people, but, especially during COVID, there's just like so much out there. There's so many videos, there's so much internet, there's just like so much information. And I thought, how am I going to teach a group of, internet savvy students an entire class about one truss, one triangle? How will that even, how do we make that interesting? And one of the things that I think that has been so exciting about this for me and hopefully for the students is that one single simple thing can really reveal so much more, right? It's like an onion. There's like cultural, there's history, there's architecture, there's construction, and on and on and on. So the course, while it was really around scaffolded, or was really focused on making the truss and making architectural drawings, was also scaffolded by historians. So we started with, multiple architectural historians to talk about Gothic, to talk about Lindsay Cook, who lives and breathes, actually worked with Andrew Tallon, Notre Dame, and talked specifically about Notre Dame, the construction methods. And so we talked about a lot of things at the same time as making. So this is actually the Andrew Tallon's book that was translated by Dr. Cook, and she's been a collaborator from the beginning. And we were, some of these original images, it wasn't really imagined that they would be useful in terms of scanning the trusses, but lo and behold, they were very, very important. So just some more images of these trusses. And I think it's another thing to think about is, so Remy Fremont, there's actually 3 architects, but the 2 main ones. Remy Fremont was brought in after the fire because his sort of second thesis, or his thesis in preservation, was really, he mapped all of Notre Dame. So he spent months upstairs, in the forest, just drawing everything. And so these are some of his drawings on the left, and you can see the sort of Viollet-le-Duc portion, and then these some of the older trusses. So what you see here are his drawings. So he had his original drawings. So I gave students a pack of his drawings and said, okay, let's figure out, what is this truss? And the image below is the sort of AutoCAD versions from Carpenters Without Borders. What's amazing is Remy's entire career was born out of these drawings, and students are drawing sort of less and less in school. And to see and understand how this can really shift and really make a career has been, I think, important for many students. So we started by just looking at those drawings, trying to understand the drawings. They seemed simple enough, but it took some time. They started then to make just to try to figure out the geometries by making simple models, say, 1 to 50 or something, and 3D printing them and trying to get an understanding. But none of these models actually had any understanding of the way the joinery and how the joinery works. So we started to look at how that joinery works. So while they were felling trees in the sort of medieval method, we were, getting white oak. Most students, of course, are using basswood, which is like, the material properties are actually very different than, what was being used. So we used white oak for the model at a 1 to 10 scale. So we started to look at all these frames, the primary. So one thing to know is there's these primary trusses. So number 7 is the one the French did, and number 6 is what we were doing. And then there's a set of secondary trusses. So they made these models at a small scale to figure out the way it worked. They put them together, and they started to then figure out the joinery. And so the joinery is something that, I don't know if any of you did this in school, but I never learned anything about joinery in school. And so just understanding that even more simple that this triangle is just put together by just a few different techniques, and to start to understand structures, to understand, very simple tectonics. So they worked then to make this kind of joinery themselves. You can see through these. We had some white oak is actually expensive. So we were, for the model, we had to plan out all the little pieces before they had to master that first. So they worked on the joinery. We made a sample of the model in pine so that, we would make sure that we got to the 1 to 10 scale, we would be ready. So we really worked through that. One of the kind of exciting things about working, collaborating across the country and with an iconic building like this is that you get a lot of people interested. So, the students were motivated often by many kind of interesting visits here. The president of the university came. So after we built these small models and understood joinery, we then went into the 1 to 10 scale. And this is where the investment and the time was kind of I wanted them to be as ready as possible, because at the end of 4 weeks, they were going to get out on site and throw some axes and make this full scale, right? So we did a 1 to 10 scale model, and something in that scale change, they had to do all the right joinery, and the assembly is also almost identical to full scale assembly. So while these students weren't, seasoned timber framers, they were learning how to assemble. So I think it was a Thursday. I said, okay, everyone's been assigned a different piece, put it together. I'll see you on Tuesday. They were like, there's no way we'll ever get this to go together, because they had to actually scribe the pieces just like in full scale. They had to assemble it they had to figure out the order. It might have taken more than a couple days for them to figure out, but they did figure it out. And I think that it created a community, and they also then became really prepared for the assembly process. So you can kind of see here, we wanted to present the truss, but in our exhibition space, it just seemed really lonely. So students got really busy making other kinds of objects to support, and I think what they were really excited about was that there was going to be a group of experienced timber framers coming, but they had this, historic understanding. They were starting to, scour sources, and they made ink washes. They made all these objects and models that they could share with the timber framers, so that when the timber framers came, they could understand the positioning of the truss, its importance in the cathedral and the city. So it was they were planning a reciprocal conversation. So we put down I'll show you, we put the model was 1 to 10, but we also put a plan down in the exhibition space. There were axes, medieval axes made in France. This is one of them. They had that were to be used on site. So there was no electricity on site, and it was terribly hot. If you can imagine DC in August. So after all this, we're starting to prepare. This is the lead group of timber framers that arrived. The woman in blue is the project manager, and then there's there's 14 leads. And you can see they're filming. So this is the day that the timbers arrived on site. It was really exciting, 6 a.m. Most of the trees came from Virginia, from a series of different private owners who donated trees. They were all felled by one person. Actually, it's really amazing. Mez Welsh felled them all, and they brought them. So here we had a crane on site. That was the last piece of, luckily we didn't use, ox carts or anything, but once they were on the ground, then we started, immediately. And so we had some pretty real, like the video showed, were timber framers from across America who were really excited to be part of this. Like, this was their vacation. They came and they taught our students how to do this, how to even, turn raw timber into a material, into a usable material. So these beautiful shirts were also a way to show who's learning and who needs to have their eyes, who needs to be looked after. Students very quickly moved from, of course it was so hot, these shirts didn't last long anyways, but they learned very quickly, and there was a lot of safety measures. So there was actually no accidents. I still think this was an unbelievable leap of faith by my university to allow us to gather this many people and throw axes with my students. I thank you if anyone's out there listening. It's like, it was really amazing. We started every day with a meeting with the community and talking about the main things we're working on, and someone would share a written passage. These drawings were done by one of the lead timber framers. So you see, there's all these different kinds of drawings. There's Remy's original drawings. There's Carpenters Without Borders drawings. There's these drawings, which are trying to be as close to Remy's official drawings so that we could make a plan for what we were doing. And then there's yet a whole nother set of drawings which had not yet been released, which were the official drawings, the tender that Notre Dame put out this last year for the reconstruction. So this was done, this was our best guess before. The first thing we did, so there's the other thing that happens is there's a lot of structures, these structures classes. No one's paying attention to their structures class. and then so on the first or second day, a professor from VMA came, Greg Mullen, excuse me, who was also the rigging master for the main lift. He built a half-scale truss, and we spent the day trying to figure out the math. How much force does it actually take? And if we are more people, what does it actually take? You know, so it was a little painful, but I think probably the best hands-on lesson the students had, trying to figure out the actual forces. So this is the half-scale truss. And he had us figuring out how to lift the shear leg. This was a single shear leg. The full-scale truss had 2 shear legs. And then having the students really be part of that rigging process, which is, you know, a whole nother area that is not talked about. In fact, your image is kind of interesting because it shows a crane, and that's most likely what they'll do. But no one seems to know how they actually got those trusses up there. We had multiple historians, Remy, they don't know. It seems like they just don't know. So here we have lifted this half scale. One of the other things that happened was that, like, you know, there was the National Building Museum got really excited about this, and they came to visit multiple times, and they saw the student work. And the original plan was really to just have the truss, the full scale truss at the National Building Museum. But when the National Building Museum came, they were amazed at the work that was produced. So students started to produce more work, and they created an exhibition for the students that sat with the full scale truss. There you can see, now you can sort of see the plan of Notre Dame at 1 to 10. You can see the location of that main primary truss behind me, and then secondary is behind it. Students made these beautiful ink washes of the cathedral, and I will show you some pictures later, but there was some really fun part where when the architect Philippe Villeneuve and Remy came, Remy spent a lot of time with the truss, but Philippe found all of the student errors, which I think was really kind of fun. You can see a picture of him. He's students, now we're getting a little bit into, maybe some of you already know all of this about timber framing, but some of the sort of technical parts of hand hewn and timber work, and some of the different axes that we looked at. So these are French axes, but when the timber framers arrived, there were over 200 axes that were on site. And everyone all the students became drawn to different ones and they learned how to use the axes, but also found their personality in them. We used all traditional tools. So they went from debarking, you can see some of these, and followed all the methods in terms of scribing, sort of dropping lines, snapping lines, and basically kind of working through these chalk lines. And so one of the things that was really amazing was to see these really experienced timber framers teaching completely, novice students from the beginning to the end. And in a very, very short amount of time, they took this on themselves. They did their own chord actually. But I have to show, I did the golden axe, so they got really good. So you can see he was notching from above, but there was also there were multiple very specific ways, different ways of notching. So there was a German way, and the same happened with hewing. So this kind of back and forth, this upper from below, hopefully this. When? Different styles of students they wanted to, this was their chord that they took on. Here's some more experienced framers. And here you can kind of see they really went through this very regular process of notching and the different kind of broad axes they used. And then they got into more finished hewing as they got closer, and that was also a process where they were, literally their hands were held until the memory in their hands kind of helped them move through a more complete or a systematic way. There were framers from all around the country.
And a little bit easier.
That's a really short, I have a longer video later, but there was something really multi-sensory about the experience. It was hot, they were tired, they were motivated. There was a constant sound that you could hear the sort of notching and hewing of the wood, but then you also heard every 15 minutes that we were working at the base of the basilica, so you could hear time, you knew when the long break was, and it was a really, you moved back in time. You felt like this must have been what it felt like, along with these really kind of these moments where a master hewer and master and apprentice really working together. Lots of conversations, some about hewing, some about other things. It was really a lot of conversation. Here they were very careful about their chord, so. More of this is a different version of of the finishing. So the scribing was another thing that we did. So you can see the kind of joinery. We started by, just looking at this kind of joinery at that scale. And there was quite a variation in terms of finish that students were able to do, but then the sort of full scale version was very similar. So they got a chance to really see how to create. And this guy actually was one of and he wore those hot corduroy pants the entire, if anyone's met a Zimmerman, I think they're required to wear these pants. So he wore these no matter how hot it was. I don't know how he did it. Everyone who came on site was like, what's up with that guy's pants? But, and you had to explain, it's very important Zimmerman, he's a great guy. He did the drawings too. There was a lot of waste. So there was, quite a bit of waste. We filled 3 containers. And it was, people came up and took pieces, and it was the other part of the experience was to have, there's a religious community on Catholic University campus. So there were many people that would stop and pray or stop and, talk about the cathedral and their experiences. So it was a very the community was very much engaged. This is just a view of the site. So you can see kind of how it was really busy, really messy. Here we're starting to assemble it, but the scribing hasn't been done yet. So you'll start to see, they start to put the members in, but they have to do them at a certain order. And at this point, all of the crews had been kind of working separately, and now they're starting to come together and they have to start to collaborate. We had also had the opportunity of North Bennett Street School, which is in Boston. They came down, and their students were working with us. Everyone was working together, but they also built, we had enough timbers to try to build a couple of other things that may have been used during the construction. We're not totally sure about this, but we built a trestle with a pit saw. So typically it's like this, where someone stands above and someone stands below, but we built it as a trestle. It's a three-piece, sort of a tripod. And so it was kind of dangerous because you would stand where Michael is standing, he's the teacher, and you would split like that. And then when you get to the middle, then you would helicopter the log and do the other half. So the thing that's kind of, everyone's trying to figure out, well, how was this made? How are these pieces made? And as you can imagine, a piece like that, that's sawn and then spun and done the same thing with him, you're going to have like a split in the middle, right? So you can imagine that if you're looking at these pieces, these trusses in Notre Dame, you can imagine, well, if you see a certain mark in a certain place, oh, hey, they must have done that. So there's a lot of kind of reverse thinking, and some of the actually a good amount of the timber that was burned, you can still see, in fact, some things that we never knew, like how some of the pieces of joinery, which weren't scanned, it wasn't an X-ray, they were scanned from the outside or drawn from the outside. Some of those things became revealed. So here's some of the finished pieces. We also made pegs, right? So there was this truss, there's virtually no steel in any of the trusses really, but any metals, but this were all put together by pegs. So we had a peg making factory, and it was actually kind of a nice place to be because it was in the shade. So we made a lot of pegs, and a lot of them broke. And actually these pegs were more sort of turnip shaped than they would be. They would have been more cylindrical, but because we knew we were taking apart and putting it back together, we had to kind of make them more triangular. Peg making. You might even see one of my kids in the background there or two.
I always enjoyed being at Heartwood and showing them the tie beam offcuts.
That was Lorenzo, who was, as an artist and craftsperson who really helped the students along the way.
Did you make your own shaping horses?
We did not, but I suspect they came from a lot of the different framers. So I guess I don't know. We didn't make them. We just used the ones that were there. That's a good question. Here we're working on scribing. So you start to see these different personalities coming together to figure out the pieces and how they go together. A lot of learning, even from, all right, so I have a short story, a side story that happened, kind of a specific side story, because there was a lot of learning that happened on the ground. And one of the things that one of the master framers was really interested in was trying to understand in the queen posts, if they were just two pieces that were sandwiched together, they called it the pickle fork. So these pieces, or were they ribboned from one single piece? And so there was some of the scholars were thinking it could have come from one piece if you were really trying to find the right, be economical or think about, and having a good fit between the two pieces. So there's, of course, a long history of that happening in medieval Europe, and two sort of continuous places where they found this was in Scandinavia. So there's a long standing rivalry between the Norwegians and the Swedes. And of course, this, I think, actually exemplifies some of that argument. But so Norwegian, we were going to split the queen posts, one of the queen posts in a Norwegian style on one side and then a Swedish style on the other. The other queen post we made out of two pieces of wood and put together. So you see actually the those marks of those sort of techniques in the demonstration. So of course you all know probably a little about these wood churches, Norwegian Stav churches. And so this sort of dual story is that the Norwegians there's a living history of how wood is taken care of, how it's managed, how it's split. It's living, like every young Norwegian knows how to split wood. I'm married to a Norwegian, he knows how to split wood. My son knows how to split wood. It's just like, it's a thing they know. And that's been something that's passed on from generation to generation. And the Swedish model has more, of course, they're more sophisticated. So they have some written history about it. So this is the Swedish kind of method. So the Swedish method involves, precisely drawing a line and using basically hammering your axe into the wood on a very precise line. The Norwegians or some of the current scholars said, no way, there's no way that the alloys back then would even a current framer would never dream of like messing up their axe by hammering it, right? But the Swedish side said, no, this is how we do it. These are just, I have a couple of, this is it doesn't look as sophisticated as the I made it sound. Here's the Swedish method. Today.
Klyvningen börjar med att klyvsnittet markeras med yxa och klubba i vardera änden av stocken. Här kommer den lodlinje som markeras på stockens ändytor väl till pass. Nu vidtar arbetet att göra den första klyvmarkeringen längs med hela stockens längd. Bit för bit flyttas yxan och den drivs ner med tunga träklubbslag. Det är viktigt att ingen del av klyvsnittet hoppas över. Det kan innebära att klyvningen drar snett om trädet har en växtvridning. Den markerade linjen följs noggrant.
And this driving is kind of interesting because it's really working with the material.
Redan vid andra vandringen längs med stocken med yxa och klubba kan man se att klyvsnitt.
One of the most interesting things about this kind of handmade work is that it's not being it's being worked really like the way the material wants. So if you're working with an axe, the axe moves with the fibers in a way that a machine just can't do. It's not as sensitive. And then here is the sort of Norwegian method where they're just hack at it. And it's done. Go right at it. And so the argument was, of course, the Norwegians, that they can't, nobody can do this too precise. How can they do this? So here's the Swedish method. So here's what we kind of reenacted on site. And I'm going to play the video, the time lapse. So this, believe it or not, generated a whole lot of excitement on site because we'd been waiting for many days for this thing to finally split. Because they meticulously did one side Norwegian and one side Swedish. And so the Norwegian version means, basically carving a channel, like creating a small notch along the length of the piece. And then the Swedish is just drawing a line, right? So the Norwegian method then required that someone had good aim, basically. You'll see this. The other thing that was really amazing is that the piece then fit like a glove when you put it back together, of course. And so we flipped back and forth until it finally broke. So some of these characters, these guys are editors from the Timber Framers Guild of America Journal, and there's some young timber framers, Earth Treks that had it. There was an anthropologist from England. It was quite the group. Hopefully we'll see this split. Ooh.
So how long would you say that was?
Well, I think it took a couple days, really 2 days, but it didn't need to take that long. But I think it was, we really wanted to make sure that we were really afraid, because, of course, the bananas with the tent with it. And so we were worried about just ripping or breaking, but so they were really slow. So if you were in my class, I would have quizzed you on this or waited till later to ask you which one is which, but it was really neat to see in the Building Museum in person, to approach this truss in person and really see sort of the Norwegian method. You can really see the mark of the maker versus the Swedish method, was just very precise. And the other queen post is 2 pieces together, so you really see those as 2 separate pieces. I want to show you a quick video of the raising. So this is actually the second raising. So we were poring over Remy's drawings, you know, for a very long time. Oh, I want the sound. I can turn this down. For a really long time. And so inviting the architects was an endeavor that took, you know, a year and a half before they were able to make it. And they didn't really want to leave until they felt. So this was, we did this, we put it back together and raised it so that they would see the truss. I might have mentioned this to some people, but Remy hadn't seen those drawings, hadn't seen this truss since through it, right, just before the fire. So when he saw the truss, he was really moved, you know, he was all over the truss, instantly climbing it, pointing out things, and I'll show you a picture. He really was glowing from it. And so the hand raising is really, you know, we did 3 raisings, and the 2 of the 3 raisings were all done by hand. And the 3rd at the National Building Museum was a raising that was done with the crane, and it was just so different and so fast, and didn't need a community. So here's some of the images of the raising. The first raising on campus, the Cardinal, Wilton Gregory came. He's also the chancellor of the university, so he came and blessed the truss and was part of the process. Then a couple days later, we raised the truss on the National Mall. Of course, the timber framers were like, you're just supposed to put the truss together, put it where it belongs, and leave it there. You're not supposed to take it up and down, but they obliged and were helpful, and obviously. So then we raised it on the National Mall, which was really an amazing experience to see the truss situated on the mall like that. A different kind of rigging experience. We weren't allowed to stake into the ground, so it required another kind of level of thinking about the raising. And then the 3rd, which actually we've raised it a few more times. I'll show you a picture at the National Building Museum. There's something that happens some of you might know this, but when you finish a timber project, you end up with the youngest timber framer is elected to go climb the truss and put a wedding bush on the top of it. So luckily we had 3 different ones, and there were actually 3 different styles of climbing. The first one seemed pretty scared. Second one was showing off a little bit. And but anyway, so they climbed the top of the truss and put a eucalyptus, I think it is, or there's it's just something green. I can't.
Right?
What is it?
It's an evergreen.
It's something. Yes, it's something.
It's acacia.
Is it? See, you guys already know. We also we had this opportunity to have this this was the first thing that the National Building Museum had after or during COVID. So they're kind of reopening a little bit. A couple of images of the exhibition of the student work. You'll see that they, you know, of course, the wood itself became center, and you can see the entire church and some of these 3D models that the students made, really just trying to really show, you know, where the truss is. Oops, it's there. They made beautiful models that use 3D printing and sorry, this was in pine with the small models. They made incredible drawings. This was just a 6-week class. I can't believe the amount of work. They were motivated in a way I've never seen students be motivated. The university was motivated, you know, from the chancellor to any person on campus across all the disciplines. And it was really amazing to see the amount of cross effort. In the middle of like the day, the provost office would deliver ice cream. And it was just a really nice effort. And students came every day bearing gifts. You know, I couldn't sleep last night, so I drew this. You know, I saw this picture in a book. I had to draw it again. And it was just phenomenal, the work, the drawings that they made. This was one of our star students, Juan Soto, and the drawing. The rector from Notre Dame Cathedral came and met with the cardinal, and there was an exchange of American funds. You might know this, but the second biggest funder after the French are the Americans for the saving of Notre Dame. So we're really trying, and there's so many connections. We could probably talk for another hour about that. We then took the trust to Atlanta, to Millennium Gate, and all the student work. This is a really funny place to exhibit student work, but it was kind of beautiful the way it was situated in sort of the salon style. So that we raised the trust then in Atlanta last spring. It's really been an effort for students to see how you exhibit similar work in different places. We hope to exhibit it in more places as well. We've continued to work on the model that you saw from the 1 to 10 scale model. And I think that this model, we've continued to add to it. We've started to think about other parts of the cathedral that are linked, like the water removal system. And we've been able to work with Dr. Cook, who has access to the Andrew Talon scan, who's been giving us very precise these scanned images so that we can make craft other parts. So we've been working on another very interesting, also had to be restored because of water damage at the same time as some of the trusses that Viollet-le-Duc had to restore with some of the water removal. So we're looking at the water, the gargoyles and the tops of the buttresses as another set of humble but really important elements. We're trying to 3D print everything we can.
That's great.
Yes, so this is what you probably were all waiting for, or this is what I was waiting for a long time. Finally we waited, a year and a half to get them, and then their flight was delayed a day. So the handsome guy on the left is Remy and Philippe. They are very much like the two restoration architects, Lessus and Le-Duc. It's very interesting. So Philippe is the main architect, of course, who oversees everything, and Remy is the truss master. You can see it was like he told us it was like Christmas. He got in there right away and started climbing on it and started telling everyone how to, and everyone was, I think we could have devoured him. We had a lot of questions. So here he was talking to us. He had to give a lecture. And he came back after and spent almost the entire evening until like 1 or 2 in the morning, where I was finally like, you have to go home. You have to go to Notre Dame. They won't be happy if we send you too tired. But so he came back and spent the night showing all the new drawings and answering every single specific question. And this is just some more images of the second raising. Some of the panels. I think I'm over in time. So we had a panel discussion as well when they came, and these two guys are actually going to be part of the recon. So this is Dr. Cook. She knows everything about the cathedral as well. But these two guys on the left are actually, as we know, there's only maybe a half dozen Americans that are going to work on the reconstruction in Paris. And so these two have been hired to work on the reconstruction. And my goal is to get students over there to participate in some way, to see the reconstruction or to understand what a modern reconstruction really looks like. And this is a walkthrough of that. You can see this apps model as it's being complete. We're still working. It's not very clear, but we're working to fill out the rest of the roof structure, which will take some time. And we need more collaborators, maybe some more. Maybe there's some other people interested. And here's some of the work on the water system, the finials and the parts of the buttress. these are all the framework of the student drawings. We also built truss number 7, so that's the next one of that. And virtual visit of some of the 3D prints and early laser cut models. One of the other part of this exhibition is really to try to be hands-on so people get a chance to see how things get put together. And then I will end with this picture because for me, I feel like a forever student. I am learning so much as I'm teaching, and to see Philly pick up the student model and find this isn't right over here, or this is missing over there, was not as embarrassing as it was exciting. To say, oh my gosh, there's nothing that beats a visit in person. But all of these, even though we have access to all of these things, there's still nothing better than documenting in person. So that's it. I think we're open for
Yes,
questions.
the floor is open. Yes, sir.
Has there really been that thought that they're going to build the structure using, hand tools as compared to just building with saws?
Yeah, they're doing everything pre-Viollet Leduc by hand, and everything post-Viollet Leduc the same machine. But there is something really interesting, and they call it tie mixed, where they're basically, even in the hand hewn things, they're basically taking off a lot of the raw material and leaving, a couple inches or 3 inches around so they can do the finishing. So it's a mix, but they're calling it traditional.
So these logs were recently cut, I guess, but were they ever dry? How do they keep from splitting and warping?
It's really interesting because the sort of medieval method is that it would be done green. So you would get a lot of juice. It's like water everywhere. It's easier to manipulate when it's green. So they felled everything in the spring, and then it was done in the summer. So then, and then the current wood that has all been felled and they're ready with it. In fact, there's something kind of interesting side story. The spire, for example, is emblematic of, it's one of the most iconic pieces of the roof structure, and it will be made of wood from all over France.
Wow.
So they made sure to cover all of the areas. In fact, I don't know if they're listening, but I think that there's even some wood that they would not have accepted, but in the effort to include all of France, they have taken, wood from everywhere.
It becomes a national sort
of
work.
Yeah. The price of the wood is like astronomical. It's some like ridiculous amount of it's very high-end French wood.
So they're not actually going to use the truss that you
No.
Oh, I thought you were doing this I thought everybody was making it.
Yeah, the goal,
the dream,
the dream was to send the truss. And but what happened is that the specifications for the making of the truss came out after we made the truss. So we kind of knew that it was also, the wood, it has to come from a maintained forest. And we only have one maintained forest in the States that might meet the French criteria, which is Constitution Grove, not far from you.
Okay.
Which was started by George Washington to maintain the USS Constitution. But the very specific cellular structure of the American white oak and the French white oak isn't exactly the same. So it's not perfect match.
It reminds me of a story that many of you may have heard, and I can't remember the details exactly, but there was a building at Oxford University that was in the process of being restored. It had a hammer beam ceiling truss system, and they needed to rebuild those. And they were thinking, my goodness, where will we find the wood to do this? Parallel with the physical investigation, they were doing an archival investigation in the Bodleian Library. And they found, along with documents about the original construction of that building, they found a document which was the deed to a piece of property where several hundred oak trees had been planted at the same time they built the building. And in the deed, it said, this is so they will have wood to rebuild it. Hundreds of years from now. That's sustainability. Sustainability means you plan ahead. As Ruskin said, you don't leave, leave your descendants in the lurch. And so the thing that I love about the presentation that you made, which I hadn't seen the full presentation, it's fantastic, is the way in which we have this complete intermingling of tangible and intangible heritage. It's really just one of the most beautiful exercises of transmission of knowledge. So I hope that at least some of your students will continue in this line. Have any of them said anything to you about wanting to do this?
Yes, well, I will say a couple of like anecdotes. So one or two of the students were just really kind of quiet, and they were transformed, like holding an axe, I guess, makes everybody a little more confident. So that was really amazing to see that kind of transformation of students. There was also some like evening activities. We got to use the laser cutter to create a target, and we did some axe throwing at night. Just totally off the record. There's no pictures of this. And the best axe thrower was one of our students. So shout out to Patrick. He was always right in the middle. But so I think he might be in axe throwing now.
How about that?
But definitely students
That's
have.
not quite what I meant when I asked the question.
Students have definitely, I think that there's been a transformation in terms of also how they think about structures and tectonics, thinking about history, thinking about making, and they aren't far enough out of school yet to be timber framers.
Well, maybe some of them will go into conservation.
Yes, and there's definitely two students that have started to participate more with Hands House directly and working with Hands House and some of their outlets as well. So
fantastic.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know about your institution, but during the whole presentation you made, I could only think about at my institution, there's an entire department of risk management.
Yeah.
And if we had gone to risk management at Notre Dame and said, we want to teach our students how to, use axes and hand hew logs and so on, they'd say, no, you're not going to do that.
I know.
How did you get around that?
Well, if Luke is watching, I will say part of it was probably this
don't say it in
COVID.
front of them.
This was a bit of a bubble, that bubble in the summer. We were just so happy to get out and be in person. We had good insurance, and students weren't required. They didn't have to do it, only if they wanted to. So we had good waivers.
Yeah. Good Lord.
Lots of waivers everywhere, but literally none of our students got hurt.
Right.
There was a couple of the more experienced framers. The axes are really sharp. So I think one or two kind of nicked their boot, or one person kind of got like a cramp in their arm, but it was very no accidents.
Great.
Yeah, our biggest fear was COVID. So that was really, yeah.
When you were moving the truss around and exhibiting it in different locations, did you have to dismantle it and put it back together?
Yep. Yeah, we took it apart, loaded it on the trailer. Well, from Catholic University to the mall, we loaded it on the trailer. From the mall to the National Building Museum, everything but the bottom cord, which was really big. We actually rolled the bottom cord on a cart up the street to the Building Museum. We just kind of closed the street. I'm kind of surprised we didn't get in trouble But yeah, we did get a police escort at the
In a
end.
similar vein, is it possible if that's how you were asking earlier?
Yeah,
How did they get these on the roof? Is it possible that they assembled them, had a workshop on the, above the vaults and actually assembled the trusses up there from the individual pieces?
So there was one professor, Gunnar Lucko, who thought they were, knew a lot about medieval construction, suggested that they were tilted in place, that they were assembled on a floor above the vaults and then tilted with like medieval cranes, which if you've seen Cologne, the cathedral in Cologne, they had a medieval crane for a really long time. But when we asked Remy, he was just like, we don't know.
It's very likely. I had the same thought because they can't really, they couldn't have lifted an entire truss that distance probably with that weight, but they could certainly have taken the pieces up and assembled it there and then tilted it up or some combination of.
Do you know how much your truss weighs?
Oh, I should.
How many tons?
I don't want to get it wrong. I think it's 1.5. Or 3. It was a lot. It became very thin, very fast. It was a,
What were the overall dimensions of the dress?
35 by 50, 55 by 35. It's big. It was much more, it was much bigger than it seemed. Yeah.
In the back of the room?
Yes, hello. This is David, AIA signals. I want to thank all of you who are still on virtually. I have a couple of questions for the audience. Tonya, I'll start with you. You already touched a little bit on this, but what prefabrication and what preparations were required to prepare the large timbers for fabrication into the reconstructed trusses for Notre Dame in Paris? And was aging or seasoning the timbers required?
Yeah, so there was no seasoning. They were pretty green. Some of the framers said they thought it could have been more green, like it could. And of course, it's like the more green it is, the easier it is. These seasoned timber framers, a couple of them that are going to Paris, they were like carpenter bees. They just like went right through the. I was like miserable. 15 minutes. I wanted to quit. Barely made anything, but wood chips were flying, large pieces of wood were flying. So they said that if it had been a little more green, they would have been able to move it a little faster. But it was basically nothing in terms of seasoning, very little. And then there was debarking that happened first. Yeah.
And then, Professor Semes, for you, what were a few of the more difficult technical, financial, and political challenges to address and overcome in the reconstruction of Notre Dame in Paris?
Well, I haven't been personally involved in the project, so my knowledge of it is secondhand through Tonya and public sources. I think the main thing that impressed me in looking into the question was the sort of the competition between technical arguments and cultural arguments. There was a very strong, as I indicated with the competition and the sort of the new idea, there was a very strong feeling on the part of one part of the architectural community that something entirely new had to happen. There was an equally strong feeling on another part of the community that something more like what it had been before should happen. And various arguments were given. And being architects, a lot of that debate was about how things should look. And should it look innovative or should it look traditional? I think what really ended up being the most important question was not the aesthetic debate. It was really on a pragmatic basis of how do you actually do it. And I think, and this is something that Philippe Villeneuve said to us when he was with us in Indiana, that the argument that really saved the day was the argument that we don't know how this building will react if we change the loading and we change the way that the structure behaves. We only know it will work if we let it do what it's been doing for 800 years. So to me, as a teacher of conservation history and theory, that argument really makes a lot of sense, and it cuts through a lot of, not that it's without value, those aesthetic and cultural arguments are obviously very important, but somehow or other, at the end of the day, you have to account for the behavior of actual materials in the Newtonian universe, where gravity and counter forces actually determine the outcome. So I hope that's the answer to the question that the person was looking for.
It's also really interesting because it's French. It's got, there's like, it's not its own, the cathedral is a world icon, but it's owned and managed by the state. And, the church rents it. It has a whole, the money, the way the money is moving through, it's all very complicated. And so I think that has been, to me, kind of one of the more interesting things, that it takes a lot. Yeah.
Thank you both for that. And one final question. Is the exhibit still up in the National Building Museum in DC?
It's not up in the National Building Museum. There was another exhibit at the same time. Actually, if any of you go, L'Oreal made this amazing virtual exhibition where you basically, my kids think it was me. It's like an iPad, but also these incredible images, some of Viollet Leduc's first plans. And it shows Notre Dame from beginning to the fire and the reconstruction. That exhibit has just closed and is now opening in New Orleans. So if you go there, then the new historic, that they will open it shortly. So I suggest going. It's a really beautiful exhibition. But the Truss is taking a nap in Virginia. And the student work is actually still up in it was taken down and put back up for the architects. So, yeah.
How long do they anticipate it will take to build all these trusses if they go along with the plan?
So the tender went out. They've got 1 year from now. They think they'll get it. They think they'll get it done. Philly, yeah. So the contractors have the jobs and they are going into production now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
They might make the goal for the Olympics then.
I think maybe.
Phil, you had a question?
Trust though. There's still a whole lot.
Well, so the trusses, it's sort of two main companies, and the spire. The spire is going to be built in place and lifted up.
Wow.
It will be amazing.
Bill, you had a question.
When you started all this, it was like, this is not going to be possible to build the truss the way that they did it way back, originally. And when did the light bulb go off that this is going to be possible? This is going to be happening. This can happen and will happen.
For me, I knew Hands House, the organization, the nonprofit organization before, and I had seen some of the things they'd made. So I knew that they had the craftspeople and the knowledge to do the teaching or I knew their timber framers could do it. And then I knew the French had already said, we can, the compagnon said, we can do this. So I was not sure the students would learn. I didn't know, but what was surprising was within a couple days, they were, even the same day, some of them were they just went at it and learned very quickly. It's like it's embedded in us,
Another answer to that question is it depended on who you talk to. Because our sources, people that we've worked with or that you've worked with at your outfit, people who are in the field of actually making things, had a very different view of this than people who tended to sit in book-lined rooms and cogitate about it. Not a big surprise. So the people who actually had their hands on the topic were much more positive. And so people like the compagnonnage. This is a program that's been going on continuously since the Middle Ages. So they are in fact in direct line. So that's real intangible heritage when you have that kind of lineage, right? So talk to people who actually do it for a living, and they'll tell you it's possible. So that was, I can't tell you what the date that the light went off, but that's what won the argument, because a lot of people had just assumed there are no craftsmen anymore. I hear that even today. I hear it from architects. Oh, I would love to do that, but there are no craftsmen. So, well, maybe if you specified ornament and decoration and craft, there would be craftsmen to do it. I've always found that they are available. You just have to look for them, maybe.
And you know what, this trust took us 10 days, which included one-on-one teaching for students. It would have been much faster if we just had them build it, and quite a bit less interesting and no passing on of knowledge. So it just took 10 days. And actually, you know, the framers, for them, this is just one truss. It's just the truss. It wasn't really that complicated. The joinery wasn't like crazy joinery. So for them, it was really straightforward. It was just really hot, and
But it's pretty remarkable to think that the genius, I think, of what you did with those students is that you didn't just let them watch someone else do it.
Yeah.
You actually had them using the tools. I think that's for anybody who's interested in education. I mean, that's an education when you do it. You don't just read about it or watch someone else do it. So that's fantastic.
It was fun to have the framers also learn from the students.
Oh, tell us a little bit about that. How did that?
So at some point, you know, we took the model to them. You know, they saw drawings and they, you know, making frames all the time, but to be able to show them where this truss sits in Notre Dame, and this reciprocation was really special. You know, that it wasn't just, you know, absorbing from them, but also giving back some context, some history. The model making, you know, timber framers aren't making architectural models or ink washes. So showing them some of the other parts of the cathedral was also really special. So it wasn't just taking, it was also some giving.
Well, isn't that what architects are supposed to do, right? That's what we would have done 100 or 1,000 years ago. Architects made the drawings, showed the assemblies, figured out how many trusses there should be, how high, how wide, and then people made them, right? Now, maybe 1,000 years ago, there was a different system, and who was an architect and who wasn't, what did they call them, and so on would be different. But the notion that there was someone who had a general conception of the organism of the whole building, because somebody had to, because things like that don't happen by accident. Somebody had to have that general conception. And then there had to be people to figure out the details. And then there had to be people to actually carry them out. So not so different from what we do today, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. It's
exciting. We just have to do it again. David, do you have another question?
Yes, I'm looking at more questions soon, so keep them coming. First, we have one from Greg. Were the existing dynamics of forces in the structure of Notre Dame modified when the roof was burned?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I'll say that.
Well, I think that's why they were so afraid of it collapsing, right? They were very worried about it collapsing. And one of the questions someone asked Remy or Philippe when they were here was, were you really that worried? And they were like, yes, we were really that worried. This like pile of humble, you know, timbers really made a difference. And they were really worried. And this was, they didn't feel like it was safe to leave the site until now, you know, since 2019. So I think, I think the answer is yes, they were really altered.
They were worried, and you saw in the images, you saw those temporary wooden trusses that were installed to support the flying buttresses, for example. All the vaults, all the major transverse arches and so on had these sort of temporary timber, you know, engineered, industrially produced wooden trusses that were there as bracing, because they really didn't know. And of course, there were effects of heat, there were effects of water, there were effects of just expansion and contraction, right? So there were a lot of things that would have and could have deformed the masonry. I'm sure there was some, but ultimately they were able to stabilize it in such a way that they felt more confident going forward. So yeah, it's a great question. I don't have the precise answer, but that's the general one.
We will handle it very well. And Sarah has a question. Will there be any transparent fire treatment applied to vinyl trusses and spire?
I don't think, my understanding, and I could be wrong, is that it's like you said, it's going to be prevention, better sensors, but the last thing they want up there is water, because that will make it heavy and cause a lot of trouble, cause more problems. If there were an accidental accidental alarm and the irrigation system goes off, you have a much bigger problem with all the timbers are wet and the vaults are wet.
If I understood, because this was a conversation after their lecture over dinner, and it wasn't possible to hear everything, but I understood, I think, Philippe, to say that there's a high-tech system. I know nothing about fire suppression systems, but apparently there's a system that is a kind of misting system instead of the old deluge, where just they have the sprinklers, so on. It's something like those things you pass in the summertime with outdoor cafes where it just sort of creates a mist, and the mist fills the airspace. It's not that the water puts out the fire, it's that the mist prevents the fire from having oxygen. So the fire doesn't grow. And that's the way it was explained to me. So that sounds like a good system, because it's not going to saturate the timber with water, and it's not going to do damage by coming through, but it would prevent the spread of fire. They may have also said something about some places where they would insert, planes to separate different areas. But I'm not sure about that. I may not have understood that fully. It was sort of half French, half English, and my French is not very good. So, but I did hear the part about the misting system. So that sounds very promising to me. I also was struck by the idea that they're not going to let any electrical wiring above the masonry vault. So that sounds like a good idea to me.
As we finish that last answer, one more question. What will the new roofing material be?
I think they're going to reproduce the lead roof. Lead isn't used very often in roofing nowadays. What we tend to use as a substitute for that nowadays, as all of you probably know, is turn-coated stainless, which is often specified because it looks like lead. The patina is a kind of a dull gray over time, which is how lead looks naturally. Lead obviously being poisonous is a problem. And in fact, the fire created a serious health problem in Paris because the lead pulverized. It melted, but also pulverized. So the air was full of lead dust, which, a million people or so were breathing. So that was a serious problem. But if it's stabilized, if it's not burning, if it's not, it's like, if it stays put, it's perfectly safe. So my understanding is they're going to reproduce the roof as well. Thank you, David. Any last questions? I don't know what the schedule is, Patrick.
Still have 10 minutes.
Oh, okay. 10 more minutes. Thank you. Other questions? Yes, Bob.
One that's kind of related is a number of years ago, I visited St. John the Divine in New York, and they still have a stone yard next to the cathedral where they're carving stone, and and I don't know that they set something up like that in Washington, D.C. next to the National Cathedral because of the work going on there. And is that something where students go or see what's going on or learn from that? Or I'm just kind of curious.
Well, our students do. We take our students to Washington and Virginia and often other places, again, in August, which is not the best time to visit. But as you may know, our undergraduate students spend their entire third year of a 5-year professional program in Rome. And one of the things that we introduced several years ago was, as a kind of re-entry back into sort of American architecture, we take them on this summer, after they come back from Rome, the summer field trip, which takes them to Colonial Williamsburg and Charlottesville and the University of Virginia and to Washington. I think last year they also went to Philadelphia. And the point of that is a student who said to me, when I said, well, how did you like the field trip, the American field trip after Rome? And he said, I had no idea there was architecture like that in America. Well, Did you have your eyes open? I don't know. Anyway, but the point being that it helps them to understand how the traditions of Europe, especially Italy, come to America through people like Thomas Jefferson and Latrobe and others, and see the American heritage now through the eyes of someone who has first visited Rome. Dan, you must have had something like that, right? Did you have something like that feeling?
I did, yes. I mean, even
an alumnus.
Yeah. So coming back to St. Louis, there's I'm like realizing that there's stuff under my nose that I didn't.
That's good. That's great. So yeah.
Did you do any structural stress testing on the?
Oh, that's it. No, we didn't. I was really wanting to do some stress, some modeling of all of the different trusses because I'm really curious how over time they changed, but I don't understand it yet, but I understand that they changed over time, but the historians I've spoken to haven't quite, there doesn't seem to be a consensus of if it was just local, that, the outside dimensions are that's set, but the inner making of the trusses, it's not clear if it's something that evolved or if it's just different groups that made it different ways. So, and some of them moved around and did different, of course, as the compagnon, they would move from cathedral to cathedral. So there are some of these groups like that, so it's a little unclear exactly, but definitely some of them are better than others. And you can see the sort of, this is what I think is really interesting is what happens from the day before the fire, when some of the trusses have been fixed or been, reinforced in certain places. They're not making broken trusses and reinforcing them. They're making some decisions to make it better in real time. So if there are, pieces that needed reinforcing, they're engineering it still. So there's like reasonable reconstruction, I think is what they call it in French. It's like there's some changes that they're making.
If you knew that some piece or some assembly was in fact problematic, you wouldn't reproduce it just for the sense of historical accuracy if you knew it was going to be a problem, right? So that's the reasonable reconstruction idea, that you reconstruct it within the brackets of functionality and not reproducing a problem. So for example, since I mentioned the University of Virginia, the famous case there is Thomas Jefferson was absolutely the worst architect in the world when it came to roofs. All of his roofs leaked terribly. And when he first designed the buildings at UVA along the lawn there, he had a system he invented of these sort of odd little sort of roofs that were lined with metal, and they never worked. And so when they did the restoration, the question came up, should we reproduce these roofs that don't work? And they decided, no, let's actually put a roof on this building that will keep the water out. Because that's also part of conservation, right, is survival. So I think there has to be some latitude in there.
There was just one last anecdote, was after they went to Notre Dame, the architects of Notre Dame went to Notre Dame,
yeah.
They came back to DC and we did a kind of whirlwind tour of DC, and one of the places that they spent the morning was at the cathedral, and they had this really great interaction between the stonemason at the National Cathedral, and we got to climb on the roof. I was totally faced with my fear of heights, and we got to see some of the reconstruction and some of the new pointing, and we got to climb on the vaults. It was a really nice thing. I think the architects were really excited. We also got to go inside the organ.
Oh, wow. Incidentally,
side note, Philippe loves
Philippe
organs.
is an organist.
He was crazy.
That was just fantastic.
Went crazy for it. It was a neat trip.
We know the time span for the original construction of the timber framing, of the roof framing for Notre Dame.
I think this Lindsay's book, Andrew Talon's book, kind of goes over this and makes some conjectures. I think you can read that it was 200 years, but it's been like 900 years, or the book is actually called like 900 years of construction, because there's been construction and reconstruction.
I meant just for the roof timbers themselves.
Oh, wait, what's that?
Just for the roof timbers, just the roof framing.
How long did it take?
Do we know how long that took?
Well, I think my understanding of the construction is that, you know, they started with the choir and then they had these additional pieces that took time. I think that the overall construction was something like 200 years before the reconstruction from Viollet Leduc.
But it wasn't continuous, of course, during that whole time. There were campaigns of building for the obvious reasons that we have today, which is like, you know, funding and, you know, wars, other things that interrupted it. But somebody must know, I don't know, but I'm sure that there is some kind of documentation that would give us an idea. Because it wasn't built, as far as I know, it wasn't built all at once, right? Most of the cathedrals, they started at the East End and then moved west. So there may be, there were times when the cathedral was sort of truncated, let's say, compared to the way it is now.
You should look at the book 9 Centuries of Andrew Talon.
Andrew Talon's book, yeah.
And Dr. Cook is the one who translated it. It does this, it has like model reconstructions or conjectures of what it looked like at each. It's really interesting because you see the digital model and you believe it because you're used to like seeing digital models that are whatever, part of something that you are working with or something. But then these are conjectures of what they thought it was like. So.
Right. Bill, do you have another question?
You talked about, you know, the architects of the past and how they basically put hand-drawn drawings together for the craftsmen to do what they do.
Yeah.
And that architects now, if they were to do more of that, could there be the use of more of the craftsmanship? And obviously in Paris and there, I mean, they have that. You know, we don't have as much of that here in the US, but it's still here.
Yes.
In a lot of many areas. And, you know, St. Louis has a vast amount of that.
That's good news.
So of that history,
yeah,
in buildings. So how do architects bring that back? You know, how would architects in St. Louis bring that back?
Some are doing that, and you know, it could even just be very modest things like there are a number of people around the country who are very interested in load-bearing masonry as a strategy. Load-bearing masonry has a lot of advantages. It's a wall system that is kind of self-insulating. It has certain structural advantages. It will last a long time. There are a couple of people actually in Oklahoma who are building houses at very, very advantageous price points using brick load-bearing masonry walls and timber frame roofs. And let's see, the businesses are very interesting. One is called Hope for Architecture. You can Google it. The other one is called Building Culture. And the two actually used to be one, and then the younger guy split off and started his own company. But I would definitely encourage you to look that up. Maybe this gentleman is already looking them up on his phone. That's good. But it's a very small start. But the point is, you don't have to reform the whole industry at once. That would be impossible. But anybody who has an opportunity to, even in an experimental way, start doing this, which would give employment to people who would like to do that. And in my 30 years in practice, I never once encountered somebody in the construction trade who didn't respond warmly and enthusiastically to the opportunity to learn something new. And back years ago, I worked with Philip Johnson on the theater in Cleveland, where we asked them to build arches in brick. Well, they brought an 80-year-old bricklayer out of retirement to teach the young guys how to build an arch, because nobody had built an arch in Cleveland in 50 years. And the first time they had to make a mock-up. The first time they got it wrong, because the two imposts, one side was a stretcher and the other side was a header. So the whole arch looked lopsided. So they had to say, we have to say, no, do it again. And then they got it right the second time. And then they did, you know, a dozen of them around the building. And sometimes there's just small things like that, you know, could make a difference. Make a difference not only for the building, but also for that craftsman who now has a skill that he or she didn't have before. And switching pronouns, one of the things I also wanted to say is impressive about the work that Tonya and her students did, and also these two guys in Oklahoma that I mentioned, is opportunities for women to work in construction. Now, I've been around long enough to remember when that would not have been even considered. But nowadays, actually, women are entering the construction trades. And the opportunity for a young architecture student, female, to actually have something in her hand and learn about how to lay brick or how to trim a timber, this is invaluable. So our students often are interns working for these other two firms that I mentioned. And it's an opportunity for a young woman architecture student to learn about how do you lay brick, which is a lot different than just drawing it or seeing pictures of it. You have anything to add?
I was just going to say, it's like with this class, it was, you immediately, sometimes you have to encourage students, but using an axe, it's momentum, and of course it helps to have some brawn, but like everyone can do it, and everyone can learn from it, the hewing and the finishing, and there were a lot of female timber framers, and the lead was a female. She was the coolest person I've ever met. Alicia Spence. She was amazing, and so I think seeing women as part of the team gave some of them agency or ability to get into it. And I mean, I also teach construction class, and I have some masons that come in and build a wall, for a day. And some of the female students aren't as, you have to sometimes get them, it's required. I require them all to do it. I require everyone to do it. And, laying brick, yes, sometimes you have to just do that. You just have to try. So I think you can see them. Yeah, I have many female students that are entering construction trades. I actually think that's great. Yeah. Really.
I think we have time for about one more question, and then
make it a good one.
Well, that's probably not a good one, but is there any concerns about the fact that, lumber has changed over the years as to whether the current stock is going to be structurally as sound as the old?
Are they using old growth?
They are. At Notre Dame, they're definitely using, old growth trees, but I don't know. I guess that's an interesting question, because it's the difference between the reconstruction and new construction. Yeah.
I would say it's time to start planting the old growth trees of the future. That's sustainability. Thank you for that question. Well, thank you all for coming.
Thank you. AIA St. Louis, thank you for coming in at a time that you took, and appreciate it. Thank you very much.
I was meeting with
Thank you.
this morning. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Oh, gosh. Well, it's tapes.
Thank you.
Oh, but it's fruit of a lot of